write the basic academic essay. This is for the COM 90 series, but if you're visiting from English 101 or even English 102, you might find this useful for some of your smaller papers if you have any 5-paragraph papers. First thing I want to talk about in terms of writing the paper is the step of organizing. Organizing is a little bit of a catch-all term for a lot of different things you'll need to do with your essays, including research, note-taking, outlining, that kind of thing. Pre-writing even is another part that we're not really discussing in this particular presentation. But when you're organizing your papers, it's a good idea to bookmark websites you're going to use. If you're using database articles from Lee Library or another online library, it's good to save those as PDFs. Write down when you visited the site. You'll need that for your works cited list. If you have the ability and if you want to do so, I like to print copies of the articles I'm using, and then I like to annotate them myself with old-fashioned pen and paper. You can actually use PDFs. You can use highlighting functions and little note bubbles and things like that if you want to keep track of parts of the articles that you want to come back to. In terms of taking notes, it's always a good idea to take notes on your sources, and not only that, but label the notes. I like to open a different Word doc for each source, and I go ahead and put the works cited entry at the top of the Word doc, and then keep my notes for one source in a separate Word doc. Make sure you label your notes as paraphrased or quoted. Are you turning your notes, turning their language into yours, or are you just quoting them exactly? You don't want to accidentally quote your articles exactly in your papers, because you'll wind up losing points for plagiarism. So also keep track of page numbers. As long as your sources are paginated, keep track of what page you got the information from. In terms of outlining is essential for a lot of your classes. You're not going to be asked to show any outlines or even rough drafts of papers. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be outlining. You should always make an outline for your paper. I will often provide templates for outlines so that you can just sort of fill in the blank on outlines. But your outline should include the main ideas for your paragraphs, include some explanations, things you need to explain that you might not remember you need to explain. Include your quotes and paraphrases from sources with page numbers on your outlines. And make sure you keep track of any ideas that you want to develop. You don't want to lose sight of when it comes time to write your paper. You can use the old-fashioned Roman numeral, capital letter, number 1, number 2, number 3 style outline, or you can just use bullet points, whatever works best for you. But you definitely need to outline your information and put it in the exact order that it will appear in your paper. I recommend typing your outlines and then copy and pasting it into the document where you actually write your paper. And then as you write your rough draft, you can just delete each part of the outline as you go. Here's a sample outline just for the introduction and main point 1. You can duplicate the organization for main point 1 for other main points. And in the notes here later on, you can see how to make your own outline for the conclusion as well. But basically, Roman numeral 1, introduction, capital A, your hook, capital B, what kind of background information do you need to provide, capital C, what is your thesis, and then what are your 3 main points under C. For your main point, I recommend using this organizational pattern so that your outline is helping you develop your paragraphs correctly. So like A, what's your claim? What is your topic sentence for this main point? B, explain that topic sentence. Help your reader get some footing. Don't just jump into source material right away. So after a couple sentences of explanation, we move into C, quotations, paraphrases, that kind of thing. D, interpret or explain that source material. E, what anecdotes, examples, illustrations, analogies do you need to use? um, to show the reader what you're talking about. And then F, reconnect with your thesis. Now, this main point is set up for research. If you're not doing any research, then you really won't use C and D. You won't have any quotes to interpret. You'll just jump from B to E. And look a lot more like the PowerPoint that you looked at in one of the early modules in Com 90, where you identify the parts of the sandwich paragraph. So the way I like to look at writing a paper is to think of it in terms of a fill-in-the-blank activity. A lot of people have blank page anxiety. They look at a blank page, they know they're expected to fill it with words, and in their minds that means performing magic. But writing a paper really isn't magic. It's just a fill-in-the-blank activity. And all essays have basically 3 blanks. 1 is the introduction, 2 is the body, and the third one is the conclusion. Now that second blank, the body, has 3 more blanks inside of it, and those are main point 1, main point 2, and main point 3. And of course each of these blanks is going to have smaller and smaller blanks as we go. But as long as you can see writing an essay as a fill-in-the-blank activity, it takes a lot of the intimidation out of writing. So let's check out these 3 blanks for the introduction first. You notice these are the same blanks from our sample outline a few slides ago. Your 3 blanks for the intro are these. 1, what's your hook? How are you going to get the attention of the reader? 2, what background information are you going to share? And 3, what's your thesis? If we click back a couple of slides, you can see the sample hook. America has poor public transportation. You don't need to have a fancy quote or a stellar question or some really interesting factoid. It just needs to be something that gets the attention of your reader. B, background info. America has fewer subways, trains, and buses than any other developed country. If you have a stat to share, that would be great. C, thesis. America needs better public transportation so that unemployment decreases, the environment improves, and tourism increases. So that's what we're talking about with these 3 blanks. Here's a sample introduction. It's basically everything we just read off of the outline. I've labeled each part, hook, background info, and thesis. If you need to pause the video and read over this, you are welcome to, but this is just a sample of what an introduction should look like. Main points also consist of blanks. Here are 6 blanks that we need to fill in if you're writing a short research paper that uses sources. Number 1, state your claim. Number 2, explain that claim. Here's where we get to the source material. 3A, introduce your sources if you're using them for the first time. And then B, go ahead and quote that source or paraphrase from that source. If you've already used a source earlier in your paper, you can skip 3A and just jump from 2 to 3B. And then 4, interpret or explain that source material. Don't just drop a quote on us. If you're going to use a quote, explain to us what it means. Same thing with paraphrasing. 5, add examples, illustration, anecdotes, which are basically stories, or analogies, comparisons, that kind of thing. Now, if you're not doing a research paper, if you're just writing an opinion piece that's not responding to a source, you can skip 3A, 3B, and 4 and go from 2 to 5. But obviously, point number 5 here is going to have a little more information in it, or you're just writing a really small 2-page paper. Number 6, end your main point with some relevance to the thesis. Always make sure you're supporting your thesis. When you get done with a main point, ask yourself the question, so what? Why did I write this main point? What does this have to do with the central argument of my paper and what I'm basically trying to get across in this paper? And if you can't figure that out, if you can't spell that out at the end of your main point, then your reader is going to be totally lost. So take a moment, 1 sentence at the end of each main point to reconnect with your thesis. Here's a sample main point 1. Again, I've labeled all of the parts here: claim, explain, source material, interpret source material, and then relevance. You'll notice I skipped 5, the examples and illustrations, mostly for the sake of space. But if you're writing a short research paper, you can get away with skipping step 5. If you're not doing research, then step 5 is essential to your essay. So the conclusion has 4 blanks basically, and 3 and 4 are sometimes hard to separate. Number 1, you need to begin your conclusion with a broad statement that refocuses on the big picture of the essay. Number 2, review your main points. Review your thesis in new language. Don't just copy and paste your thesis statement, but you do need to review with your reader what it is you've discussed. And sometimes number 2 and number 3 sort of blend together. Number 3, you need to make some closing statements, or maybe even pose some new questions about the topic. Sometimes writing a paper is about coming to great conclusions. Sometimes it's just about coming up with better questions. Number 4 is your last thought, and sometimes this is the closing statement or the new question. But you need something at the end of the paper that is really going to resonate with your reader, something that's going to lodge in your reader's memory, make them remember your paper. Here's a sample conclusion, and again, I've labeled all the parts. So if you'd like to, you can pause the video and look back over the sample conclusion. This video contains a sample introduction, a sample main point 1, and a sample conclusion, so you can see how to build each part of your paper. Last thing I just want to mention is that writing is a skill, it's not magic. Don't be afraid of the blank page. Think of writing as a fill-in-the-blank activity. Know what you want to say before you jump in. Take notes. Organize, make an outline, and then do your rough draft. Don't try to write your rough draft without using an outline first. Which brings me to the next bullet point: organize your ideas before you write. Write before you revise. Don't stop and overhaul your paper if you haven't finished writing it yet. Just get the paper written, and then you can go move things around, change paragraphs, delete things, all of that. And revise your paper before you edit. There's no reason to go through and look for every little comma and apostrophe when a lot of those sentences won't even make it to the final draft. And last but definitely not least, don't wait until you're in the mood to write. Just start writing. If you're going to wait until you're in the mood to write, you may never write. I am fascinated by how nobody waits till they're in the mood to do math. Nobody has to feel inspired to do math, but people act like it's some kind of artistic adventure when they're writing a paper, and it just isn't. Maybe it is when you're writing a poem or a song or a novel or a short story, but academic writing, first ability you have to have is the ability to stay put in your chair. So just start writing. If it doesn't sound good, don't delete it, just keep going, because you're going to revise and fix it later anyway.